Prior to Jindal, he was a fellow of Stanford, Göttingen University, and Max Planck Institute for the Study of Religious and Ethnic Diversity. Professor Maskar's research explores the multi-phased vulnerabilities workers experience at the lower end of India's rising economy. He is currently finalizing his book on Mumbai mill workers' response to joblessness as a result of large-scale industrial closures. While his academic writings have been published in peer-reviewed journals, edited books, magazines, and working papers, he occasionally writes opinion pieces for Hindustan Times, Indian Express, The Hindu, The Wire, Scroll.in, The Print, Sakal Times, and The Outlook. With this, I welcome Dr. Sumit to our online Buddha Vihara. Welcome, Dr. Sumit. Jai Bhim and Namo Buddha.
Welcome everyone, and thank you, the Ambedkar Association of North America, for this invitation and the opportunity to share my research with the wider community. Sorry, can somebody switch off the speaker maybe, because I can hear the echo? Yeah, thank you very much. Yes. So yes, I think this is one of the longest standing Buddha Vihara, online Buddha Vihara that I have known. And so I would, of course, like to first congratulate for the successful continuing of this online Buddha Vihara for such a very long time. And I have been also observing so many wide-ranging activities that the Ambedkar Association of North America does. And I'm absolutely impressed by the wide-ranging activities, also different kinds of issues that are being discussed through this forum. So what I have decided today, and I have partly written on this subject, is to talk about Baba Saheb Ambedkar and the labor question. So as we know that the whole issue of labor is something that there is this understanding that Ambedkar only spoke about the caste question, and he only spoke about maximum the question of untouchability, and therefore there is very less attention that is being paid by the academic scholars, but also in the popular media. So you have newspapers, you have other kinds of social media, and even to the rest of and this is, or the Ambedkarite community in general. But this is not going beyond that. The other larger, I think part of the reason has to do with also the research community that has not taken this issue very seriously. That what has been the contribution of Baba Saheb Ambedkar to the labor question? So what we usually do is we usually highlight 10 points. Okay, this is number one. He created 8 hours of labor for the workers. He had all the kind of social security benefits. But beyond that, there is much more larger area of labor that Baba Saheb Ambedkar was very, very much involved in, and he played a. Now, when we say the labor question, what are we essentially talking about? The first part we are essentially talking about here is the employer and employee relationship. So you have the employers. Now employers can come in various forms. You can have the large factories as an employer. You can have the government of India or the government of various, and how they have treated their employees. That is part one. And the part two is how did the employees on their own organize for their own rights. And this is where we see that Baba Saheb Ambedkar played a very important question that we already talk about, but also on the questions of labor. Post his returned from the United Kingdom, he was heavily involved with the Brahishkrit Hitkarni Sabha. So if you look at various kind of issues that Babasaheb Ambedkar took, one is industries. One of them is obviously the cotton textile mills, but also the Bombay dock labor, and also different kinds of hospitality industries that we understand today. Where people, their questions were different from the questions of the non-untouchable communities. So yes, there is exploitation on wages. There is also exploitation on different kinds of fronts where they don't have access to social security provisions, such as you don't get leave, you don't have hospital benefits, you don't have other kind of payment benefits. So that questions are obviously there for everyone. But in addition to that, what was important for Baba Sahib Ambedkar is the question of untouchability and the question of labor market discrimination. And this particular question became absolutely important in the 1920s. For example, one of the classic example which actually everybody probably knows partly, but let me reiterate. This is about the discrimination that people from untouchable community and particularly the Mahars faced in the Bombay textile industry. That the Mahars were prohibited from working in the weaving departments in the cotton textile mills. Now, weaving departments were the best paid department within the cotton textile mills, and they also carried the massive respect within the workforce. And this is where the upper caste workers, particularly the Maratha community workers, argued that by working together with the Mahars, they are going to face the problem of pollution, that they cannot work together with the Mahar, because in the entire production process, there was one process where if the thread is broken, you have to put that in the mouth and use your saliva to tie the knot again so that the production of the cloth production process continues. This particular aspect, the Maratha community argued that it is causing pollution and therefore they cannot work together with the untouchables, particularly the Mahars. Obviously, you have wide-ranging unions, the communists, the socialists, all kinds of unions. But it's only with the entry of Baba Sahib Ambedkar that this becomes a very important issue. And 1928 is the moment where the Bombay city witnessed a big strike. It's a huge strike that goes on for several months. And Baba Sahib Ambedkar is an important player. He says that, listen, in addition to all the demands you have mentioned, if you do not also make this particular demand that the untouchable worker should have right to work in all departments, including the weaving departments, then he will not support the strike, number one. Not only that, he went one step ahead and he said that if you don't support this demand, I will encourage the Mahar workers to go and work as strike breakers, meaning that they will go and work inside the factory while other workers are going on strike. Because of his absolute presence and the support from the workers within the community and also from some of the liberal leaders, such as the N.M. Joshi, very important leader there, the communist unions and the other unions had to agree to his demand. And it is because of this particular aspect, eventually this demand was accepted. But the mill owner said that, look, if this discrimination is a problem, it's not we are doing the discrimination. It is the workers who are doing the discrimination. But the most important part here is that unlike several other parts of the country, you don't have such kind of very powerful position that is being taken on the question of labor market discrimination. Like today, we are talking about the discrimination in the Cisco in the United States. But he is one of the first to talk about not just the question of labor, that can all kinds of exploitation in terms of wages and the hours of work they have to do. But in addition to that, that the untouchable workers face also discrimination in the choice of occupation. Not everybody has right to do any kind of occupation. And this is an important step that Baba Sahib Ambedkar took. just to prove his presence, like to the audience that I'm talking to today, that in 1928 he agreed with all the unions that yes, we will support as long as you support this demand. But in 1929, Baba Sahib Ambedkar said, enough. We can't go on strike often because already we had gone through the strike and workers uh, from various unions. I hope the voice is still clear because somebody wrote that they can't hear me properly. Is it okay?
No, we can hear you.
Can somebody confirm that? Okay, sorry. Just let me know when the voice is not clear. I mean, the internet is probably going up and down sometimes. So in 1929 strike, Baba Sahib Ambedkar refused to join this. He says that we already have faced enough kind of hardships, and this kind of, one can say, romanticism is not allowed, and therefore he did not allow the workers to join that strike. So one part is the labor market discrimination that Baba Sahib Ambedkar was arguing against. And therefore we see that his role was absolutely important. The second part, where Baba Sahib Ambedkar actually plays a very important role, is about the talking of independent labor party. Now, independent labor party, as most of us know, was started in 1936. And this is his influence from the Fabian socialist that comes from United Kingdom and other kinds of exposure. Now, it is important for me to mention here that much of the criticism, again, Baba Sahib Ambedkar, comes from the people who have taken, the left kind of positions, where they say that Baba Sahib Ambedkar has not even read the writings of Karl Marx. And this is a very unresearched opinion. If you look at the library of the Milind College in Aurangabad, all his books on the writings of Marx are very much stocked there. Unfortunately, we do not have a list of all the books that are there, and I hope somebody takes a note of this and at least they release the amount of books that are there in the library, so that at least this kind of propaganda that is going on against Baba Sahib Ambedkar, that he was not even reading this text, is at least, we go rid of that kind of accusations and we move on with kind of what exactly he was talking. So he's one of the first persons to bring in the Independent Labour Party, where labor itself is the absolute focus. And the agenda of Independent Labour Party is to fight against the social, economic, and political rights of the workers. The Independent Labour Party also stated that it did not represent a single caste or religion. And there is no difference between the touchable workers and the untouchable workers, the Brahmins and the non-Brahmins, and the Hindus and the Muslims. So as far as Independent Labour Party is concerned, it at least had the vision to represent workers irrespective of their caste and religious status. And it was this particular agenda that led to the success of Independent Labour Party in the 1937 elections. So that is the first election that takes place in India, where Independent Labour Party, particularly in then what is known as the Bombay Presidency, had a huge success. And Baba Sahib Ambedkar in 1938 gives a massive speech whereby the then Congress government tries to bring a law saying that you cannot go on strike, and they try to make strike an illegal activity. And Baba Sahib Ambedkar says no. If you take workers' right to strike, it is nothing short of making the worker a slave. And to quote him further, and slavery was nothing but involuntary servitude. So that's as far as his own interventions are concerned inside the Legislative Council in Bombay. And he also took on this particular fight in the streets, where he organized one-day strike on 7th November 1938. And he welcomed also the support from other political organizations such as the communists and socialists. But the leading front was done by the Independent Labour Party. Now, interestingly, what we see as scholars when we go back to the records is that the flag of Independent Labour Party was that of red color. And therefore, there is slight confusion when people see that when it's a red color, they immediately associate with the Communist Party. But it was not necessarily that. Even the Independent Labour the Party flag was that of red color, and then we had all kinds of 11 provinces. There were 11 stars. So the aspiration was to go across the country as a Labour Party. Of course, the trajectory is different. So this is as far as number one is in terms of talking about the discrimination on the basis of caste within the laborers. And second thing is also fighting inside the legal battle as far as the lawmaker is concerned. And third is to take these issues to the street, to also organize protest against the laws which take away workers' right to strike. Now that's as far as the three parts are concerned. The fourth part here is that Baba Sahib Ambedkar was probably one of the few politicians of his time which actually talked also about the rural laborers. So, for example, the struggle against the Mahar Vatan, which was a major challenge to the caste-based occupational order. The Mahar Vatan was a land granted as an entitlement to the Mahars in the village. And the entitlement was offered in exchange of extensive and exploitative obligatory services. That is, and services in the village. And in exchange of that, all kinds of labor that the Mahar community did in the village, this patch of land was given. What Baba Sahib Ambedkar said was this particular system has to be abolished because this was absolutely exploitative. It was putting the Mahar community in particular, but the entire untouchable community in general, in the servitude position. And therefore, this particular system has to be abolished. And Baba Sahib Ambedkar campaigned extensively on this question. And in 1928, Baba Sahib Ambedkar introduced a bill to abolish the Mahar Vatan in the Bombay Legislative Council. And he proposed that the government should recognize the Mahar Vatandars as public servants and suggested that particular amount of wages should be paid. So in the earlier system, the Mahars were particularly at the mercy of the villagers, the non-untouchable villagers. That whatever services, whatever jobs that was done by the Mahars, then the villagers would pay them in some kind of payment, in kind payment, like in terms of grains or other kinds of payments. Baba Sahib Ambedkar said, let's get rid of this Mahar Vatan system. And instead, whatever services the Mahars do in the village, let them be paid in form of cash. They should be treated as public servants. Of course, we know that in terms of this particular kind of demands, while there were non-Brahmins, other non-Brahmin castes who initially supported that, but they were also getting worried and in fact in hostile that if Mahars stop doing these kind of very ugly, very filthy kind of work, who will do this work? And therefore, this particular kind of demand did not receive like all kinds of support that it was required. Now, this is one aspect as far as the untouchable community is concerned that Baba Sahib Ambedkar talked about its connection to the labor. But he did not stop only at that. He actually took up different kinds of questions. So the question of Khoti system, particularly again in the Konkan region. So the Khoti system in Konkan region exploited the small and marginal farmers. And they perpetuated a kind of forced labor system because they were forced to do more kind of work and they were extracting lots of taxes from them. And the Khots are the landlords. These were largely Chitpawan Brahmins, some of them upper caste Hindus such as the Marathas, and a few Muslim landowners. And therefore, the tenants, on the other hand, were Marathas, the other backward castes such as the Muslims, the Kunbis, the Bhandaris, and the Agris, and few Mahars. So you can see that as far as Khoti system is concerned, which was also very exploitative, it was largely exploitative towards the Marathas, the Bhandaris, the Kunbis, and the Agris. And Baba Sahib Ambedkar took up this question very, in a very powerful manner. And interestingly, here you have the nationalist Bal Gangadhar Tilak, who opposed the abolition of Khoti system. Baba Saheb Ambedkar organized agitations, conferences against the Khoti system in the 1920s, and he later introduced the Khoti Abolition Bill on the 17th of September 1937 in the Bombay Legislative Assembly. In fact, Baba Saheb Ambedkar is the first legislator in the provincial assemblies to introduce such a bill for the abolition of serfdom of agricultural tenants. That is, this absolute slave-like conditions of absolute agricultural tenants. And what is widely known is the Baba Saheb Ambedkar's role in the Viceroy Council. And this is something, as scholars, we are still trying to work on because much of the documents are available, but there is also the government's hesitation to make it open in terms of different archives. Baba Saheb Ambedkar stayed as the labor minister for a very long period of time in the Viceroy's Council. And he introduced important legislations which actually had an impact on the kind of facilities that at least a section of labor in the Indian countryside or even in the cities enjoyed because of his intervention. This is just a small kind of overview on what exactly he has done. But if we look at various minute sectors, and I'm happy to answer some of these questions later, is if you look at the Bombay Municipal Workers Union, he was the president of that particular. He actually played a very important role in organizing the municipal work. If you look at the coal mining workers in the Bihar region, now what is Bihar and Jharkhand region, he actually also played a very important role in terms of what kind of work women should do and what kind of work, what kind of protection that needs to be offered. As a labor minister, he traveled across the country and he looked at these questions very seriously and intervened in a very important way. So today we are talking always when we talk of the question of labor, in the common public mind, it is an imagination that it is socialist and the communist who actually deal with labor question, and organizations such as the Ambedkar organization, something that is actually has happened. And therefore, I have particularly chosen this topic because there are lots of topics on Baba Saheb Ambedkar and Buddhism. There are Baba Saheb Ambedkar and the constitution making, which are widely known, and his contribution in those areas is absolutely known, particularly his intervention on the Hindu Code Bill. In fact, that is one area that needs to be really looked at on the Hindu Code Bill. But I will not go in that direction at the moment. But what I will return to is the labor question. That as far as laborers are concerned, that if you look at several atrocities that are taking place today, many of the atrocities take place because the laborers from the Dalit community demand the wages that they have worked for. That's it. That they work for a certain number of hours, and just because they demand those wages, they face violence from the upper caste community, depending on which region we go. So that actually, or the touchable communities, which Baba Saheb Ambedkar preferred as a category. And therefore, you have labor is very much at the central to the caste system. That you need somebody to do the dirty work, such as the sanitation work. You need somebody to do the dirty work of picking up the dead animals. You also need some dirty labor to be done by all kinds of people. And what we have is a situation, and this is the last point I'm going to wrap up with, is that when the Dalits, particularly after the conversion, obviously the event started much before the conversion to Buddhism, that people, particularly Dalit Ambedkarites, who decided that we are actually going to give up this village occupation, which is forced on us, that's when they faced violence. That the moment they start refusing to do that work, they began to face violence. And yet, what we see today is so many generations have passed and they have managed to successfully give up that caste humiliating work. Of course, the system of caste is such that it puts you even in the urban, in the first instance itself in the village, under the influence of Baba Sahib Ambedkar, they were able to successfully give up that occupation, and which had a very direct caste connotation. And when they gave up the occupation, it was not easy. So something like when we say that, okay, from tomorrow onwards, I will not do this work of picking up the dead animal. They had to actually face violence. Their children had to face bigger problems in going inside the schools because their parents were not doing the caste-based occupations. And therefore, labor is very much central to Baba Sahib Ambedkar's intervention in political, social, and economic spheres. And this is something I am working on as a scholar on labor studies. And this is what I would like to eventually write for the wider audience on his contribution to the field of labor, where the intersection of what is famously known as the intersectionality approach these days, it's a very overused word, but what essentially it means is that how caste and labor interact with each other, how caste, gender, and labor also interact with each other. And on that note, I'll stop. Thank you very much.
Yes, so thank you, Dr. Sumit, for enlightening us on Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's vision on labor. Uh, mm, his vision and writings as in the post and pre-independence era, and I think now next month is the 1st of May, which is the Labor Day, right? So before
Yes.
opening our floor for the questions for our audience, I'll take liberty to ask one important question, and which is like because of the 1st of May, which is a International Labor's Day. So how are our
Mhm.
governments integrating Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's labor equalities or labor rights with the people from with the downtrodden people in current scenario?
Yeah, that's thank you, Dhananjay, for this important question. See, one of the problems is with the Indian government is that already from 1950s onwards, we never took the question of labor welfare very seriously. If you look at the proportion of workers in the what is famously known as the informal sector, it has always been 90% or more, which means that out of the 100 jobs, nearly 90 jobs have been in the informal sector, which means that 90% of the workers don't have minimum wages. They work more than 12 hours of work. They don't have any kind of social, or they don't get any kind of support for their children. So in that sense, the government has never taken this part of issue very seriously. And in fact, now what we see is that even in the government sector, nearly 50% of jobs at the class 3 and 4 level are already contractualized. So rather than making things better, we are actually making things worse, even for the very tiny minority of the workers who benefited from that situation. But yeah, that's as far as policy is concerned. But as far as Baba Sahib Ambedkar's role is concerned on the 1st of May, uh, really very hardly anyone really talks about that kind of contribution. That needs to be really written about by more people. Yeah, I think Vivek's hand is up. Yeah.
Yes, Vivek Dada,
Yeah,
please go ahead.
yeah, thank you. Sumit, it was wonderful. And this is Vivek again. And I just wanted to ask you these questions. And I know this is the basis of like a core to our Ambedkarism and for mostly like for the labor unions in India. When we see this current regime has brought so many changes in the rules and regulations, where the labors are not protected anymore. The labor hours, like, supposed to be 8 hours, working hours, now they have gone up. So do you think this is like intentional, like a government intentionally doing it to remove all this, like, the what
Mhm.
rules and regulations have been given to the people of India to in the workforce, is intentionally demolishing it, and this is really pathetic, when we see where labor rights are not protected and the labor unions are not making any noise about it?
No, this is an important question, but as I just shared some facts, from 1950 onwards, nearly 90% of your labor force never had any kinds of rights, honestly speaking. So what we are essentially talking about is 10 or even less than 10% of people who actually had access to some of these rights. Now, what the government is doing is trying to get rid of the rights of those 10%. 90% are already out historically from 1950 onwards, even if you take that as a point, see, because that is our time of the beginning of Republic. But now what is happening is even the 10%, even the most educated people, the IT professionals. So you have different kind of recruiting agencies. And therefore, the government is now trying to get rid of even those people who would benefit from the formal system. So you have a newer kind of contractual arrangements where somebody else is a contractor, you're working for somebody else, and somebody else is paying you. There is no direct employer-employee kind of relationships. So in a way, the 90% of workforce was always out. Now, what is happening is they are curtailing the rights of the 10% or even less than 10%. And that they have successfully done since the 1990s. That if anything that has changed is that for the 10% or even less than 10%. So in some way, as a scholar on labor, I'm not surprised. Because let's say if 50% of or 60% people, workers have more rights and then it is reduced, we can still understand. But India is such a kind of country where large number of people really were already outside the kind of welfare provisions. And of course, it is unfortunate that even that 10% or 8% is not anymore part of that. It obviously is deliberately doing it because even for the IT sector, they don't want to have such kind of welfare because then you can exploit their hours more. And even you have Narayan Murthy saying that young people should work 70 hours a week, which is obviously unthinkable in the developed part of the world. You will never have anyone saying such things in the United States or Canada or any European country. But this is the irony of the Indian situation, where you have even the biggest IT kind of person saying that people should work 70 hours. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for the answer.
Thank you, Vivek Dada, for the question. And I will ask Mr. Satyanath to ask his query.
I have a couple of questions. Um, uh, I'll put up my questions um, uh, at once, and then he could answer them one by one. Number one is whether Dr. Ambedkar, first of all, gave him, and it was a very good presentation. I wish I could follow. I mean, as I mentioned in my in my um, uh, my a written question earlier, that I was having a hard time for understanding your voice. Anyway, but my first question is whether Ambedkar tried to organize labor in the private sector or wherever. And second question is whether he suggested any kind of or any kind of policies or laws to the British government in favor of labor. And the third question is, when did he join the union, British union government, as I guess he was called Secretary of Labor or Minister of Labor? I'm not sure what was his title. So when did he join, and whether he had explored joining them earlier, and whether the British had tried to explore such cooperations from him earlier or not. So these are my questions. I mean, whether he uh, tried to organize labor directly, in any private sector company or wherever, and whether he made suggestions to the British government because they were the rulers, and when did he join the government? And okay, that's it. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Satyanath for your questions. As far as first part is concerned, we are talking about a time which is ruled by the British colonial state. And therefore, as far as the labor question is concerned, it was largely the private labor because these factories were owned by the private owners. And much of these government-owned companies are concerned, it came only after the Indian independence. So earlier it was only about the private factory owners of different varieties. And the government that we talk about is post 1950s. So therefore, if we were to answer that, yes, he tried to organize labor in the private sector in that sense. But also for the government, because when it came to the sanitation workers as one of the examples, yes, he also was the president of one of the unions in Mumbai. Uh, at the same time, there were workers working for various kind of industries in these various gymkhanas in Mumbai and various kind of hospitals, those kind of hospitals where it was not very common for people to work because people were scared. Because even now the mental health awareness is so weak that people say that people are mad, but it's not about the sensitivity to mental health. So you have to imagine what would have been the situation in 1920s and 30s. And it was largely the workers of untouchable community who would work in those sectors. And he also organized these kind of workers. Now, as far as the suggestions are concerned of policies, already from 1920s onwards, as I said in my speech, and maybe because of the unclarity of the voice because of internet, the point I try to make is that already from 1920s, he was making interventions, either in the form of going against the discrimination of laborers inside the factories, number one. Second, in the abolition of Khoti system, which was against the small farmers, the tenants, and these tenants were largely Marathas, Kunbis, and Bhandari caste, and some of them were Dalits, the Mahars. And the third part is the abolition of the Mahar Watan system, which was again a massive exploitative arrangement of the Mars in the villages who were expected to do lots of dirty work for the entire village community. And in the exchange, they were not getting paid in any cash. So he expected the government to treat them as proper servants. So yes, his policy interventions were already there even before he became the labor member of the Viceroy Council. So that was his status. And that started with the Second World War. You have 1940s, early 1940s is the time Baba Sahib is inducted as the labor member of the Viceroy Council. So in today's language, we can say he was the labor minister of the then particular government. And between 1940s, early 40s, 42 onwards to 46, that particular period, he was the labor member of the Viceroy Council. And he played an important role in formulating several important legislations which offered protection to the workers. So this is definitely his absolutely important contribution as far as laborers are concerned. And I hope this response covers all your questions.
I have two additional questions. One is, he said he was organizing labor in the private sector, but I guess, as unions, but the government can make rules for the private sector in favor of the union, and that they must allow the workers to organize as unions. Like in many companies, they don't even allow that. So he could influence the government in that way, that the government should push these private sector owners to allow the unionizing of the um I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Sorry, one
Uh,
second. I'll try to
and
fix
the
my
second
internet.
question is, even now, when we have independence, many contractors exploit the employees very, very badly. So,
Okay.
can the government make some rules about regarding these contractors to allow the workers to unionize and uh, yeah, and whether this can, because in most of the private sectors who are part of, say, government, uh, to whom the government hospitals and other places give some work, they collect a certain salary for the workers, but pay them only half of that. It's practiced everywhere. So whether such rules can be made for the private sector, and the way they are treated right now is that, oh, it's private sector, government can't do anything. So that needs to be changed. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Satyanath ji, again. I think what you have said is very important. And lots of these hospitals were part of the government system. And what we see, much privatization is much later after he passed away. As far as private sector is concerned, you have to divide that into two parts. One is the formal private sector and one is the informal private sector. So formal private sector was always not more than 4 to 5% of the total employment. So of the 100 people who are employed, not more than 5 people who are employed in the private formal sector. And therefore, all the provisions of social security, all the better wages, all the different kind of health benefits applied to the private formal sector. And they were very much part of the welfare system, even up to the 1980s. So if you go to the cities like Mumbai, you have the Seat tire factory, you have the Voltas, you have Godrej. All of these are private, but they actually paid good wages. They paid all kinds of social security provisions. Godrej had their own schools. You have different kinds of factories. They actually did a very good job. So his own intervention, of course, was important, but eventually it is the government's responsibility to implement those kind of provisions. So on his part, he did all kinds of interventions. Even one of the things that I'm currently working on is his role in the Bombay Maternity Act. So Bombay is one of the first regions where in 1929 already the maternity provisions are discussed. And Babasaheb Ambedkar also talks in favor of these kind of laws. Right now, we are talking about new kind of maternity laws, but that again applies to not more than 3 to 4% of female, 5% of female workers in the Indian economy. But he was very much clear on these kind of aspects. So on his own, yes, he has made his particular impact in these issues for sure. But more work needs to be done to understand his role on the rural laborers. And his legacy continued even in the 1960s and 70s, where Ambedkarite leaders talked about landless laborers. Everybody was talking about land to the tiller, which means all those farmers who are working on land should be made the owners of land. But it was the Ambedkarite leaders, particularly Dadasaheb Gaikwad, who was Babasaheb Ambedkar's right-hand man, who argued that what about landless laborers? You're only talking about land to the tillers who are working as farmers. But what about landless laborers? And in that sense, his legacy continued even in the 1970s and 80s. And that needs to be appreciated. So slowly, scholarly communities entering into those areas where right now we haven't even started appreciating his role. Second part will be critique of it. The first part is to actually just see what is happening, what he has done, and then second part, of course, we can critically analyze what have been the limitations. So the first, we are just reaching the first step right now, as far as his contribution is concerned.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
But just last one line.
Yes.
Not only to learn from what he has done, but we have to now see what we can apply today. I mean, not necessarily limiting ourselves to what he demanded, but what we demand now from ourselves, from the experience that we have had. So thanks a lot. If you could also shine a light on what we need to do right now. Thanks.
Yeah, I think what we need to do is a global kind of challenge. It's nothing to do specially with India. Of course, India has a bigger challenge. But if you look at across the world, after 1970s onwards, the welfare system has come into a major crisis. So all kinds of first world countries had to undergo this challenge of curtailing down on the welfare provisions, whether it's Western Europe or the US or Canada. All kinds of major countries had to face that particular challenge where major large scale industries closed down and they had to cut down on these welfare provisions. So Indian story is not exceptional. The only part where it is exceptional is that it was only a very handful of workers who benefited from that particular system. And that is something we have to understand. And therefore, the challenge is a global challenge. And unless and until there is a government intervention, the chances of any kind of welfare are always limited. It can't really go beyond a particular point. We need government's intervention. For that, obviously, we need to employ various strategies.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Sumit and Mr. Satyanath, for asking such great questions. So with this, do we have any questions from any other participant?
Hello, Jebim. This is Rahul Dange. I have a question. So, given the change in now effect of artificial intelligence and automation, do you think in future we will face more and more challenges to the labor rights?
No, any kind of newer kind of technology, whatever technology you take. For example, when we talk of production process, the moment you have technological innovations, it is bound to get rid of more workers and it will create new kind of jobs. Similarly, when computers were introduced, everybody was worried what will happen to the typists. And eventually, the computing industry produced more jobs than people were worried. And similarly with now artificial intelligence. So any new intervention that comes in, it produces challenges. And those who don't adopt to the newer kind of challenges, they are bound to face a major crisis. So yes, artificial intelligence will definitely create a new challenge in the market. But at the end of the day, it will also produce more opportunities. And I think it's also about getting in tune with the newer kind of changes. So whichever group actually adopts to the new changes actually benefits from it. And if you resist the change, it is not going to be helpful. So yes, it will create challenges, but as long as one adopts to the artificial intelligence, then it won't be a problem in that sense. But as far as labor rights are concerned, yeah, it will. In any case, there are challenges for labor rights. Let me make it clear that more than 90% of the workforce has absolutely no access to welfare provisions at all. So we're talking of a very tiny minority in, at least in the Indian context. So whether artificial intelligence or not, we always had problems with the labor welfare aspect. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Rahul, and thank you, Dr. Sumit, for your contribution to on this topic. With this, I think we are at the end of the session, as it is will be late night for you as well. So I really appreciate giving you us all the valuable information on Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's contribution to the labor and the dignity of labor, especially the downtrodden community and the untouchable community. So with this, I conclude this session. Vivek
Can
Dada,
we
you have any?
contact information?
Uh,
Contact.
not able to hear you,
Can
Mr.
we get
Satyanath.
contact information?
Yeah, Dhananjay, he wants my contact information, so please you
Okay,
can share it with him. Yeah, okay, yes, he will share.
Can
sure,
you
Mr.
please?
Satyanath, we'll share it with you.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank you. Yeah.
okay, thank you. Any last words, Vivek Dada, Mahesh Dada?
No, thank you. I'd like to thank you, Sumit, for joining this online Vihara session and enlighten the audience and the world. I think this is very important, and our community is always at the forefront to speak about the labor issues. I think this is very important at the time. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I think you can conclude the session.
Yes, thank you so much for joining the call, and I hope everybody will join next week's Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's birth celebration. Wherever you are, I do insist you to join and take the Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's visions and writings ahead.